Here I am once again. So I pretty much offloaded every single app on my phone. I have deleted hundreds and upon hundreds of pictures. It says that I have like 3 or 4 megabytes, I guess, maybe gigs. I don't know. But so I'm gonna try to keep reading here. And where it cut me off was at the tail end of section 3 of chapter 5, which is the Exodus, which I love their little play on words here because this Exodus has absolutely literally nothing to do with the one from the Bible. And as you can see, I got hot. I had to put my hair up. This is just a mess, I say. But I'm bound and determined to get this book done. And I feel like, once we get like into some of the notes on this book, this is where it's going to get like really, really interesting. So, anyways, while the main route of the Khazar exodus led to the west, some groups of people were left behind, mainly in the Crimea and the Caucasus, where they formed Jewish enclaves surviving into modern times. In the ancient Khazar stronghold of Tamatarka, facing the Crimea across the Straits of Kerch, we hear of a dynasty of Jewish princes who ruled in the 15th century under the tutelage of the Genovese Republic, and later of the Crimean Tartars. The last of them, Prince Zachariah, conducted negotiations with the Prince of Muscovy, who invited Zachariah to come to Russia and let himself be baptized in exchange for receiving the privileges of a Russian nobleman. Zachariah refused, but Polyak has suggested that in other cases, quote, the introduction of Khazar Jewish elements into exalted positions in the Muscovite state may have been one of the factors which led to the appearance of the, quote, Jewish heresy, which then they have a word for it in Russian, and I'm not even going to try to say it, among Russian priests and noblemen in the 16th century, and of the sect of the Sabbath observers, which is they called Sobotniki, which is still widespread among Cossacks and peasants, end quote. Another vestige of the Khazar nation are the, quote, mountain Jews, end quote, and the northeastern Caucasus, who apparently stayed behind in their original habitat when the others left. They are supposed to number around 8,000 and live in the vicinity of another tribal remnants of the olden days, Kipchaks and Oghuz. They call themselves Dag Chufuti, or Highland Jews, in the Tat language, which they have adopted from another Caucasian tribe, but little else is known about them. The above data appear in the A.H. Knipers article Caucasus People of in the 1973 printing of the Encyclopedia Britannica based on recent Soviet sources. A book by George Sava, Valley of the Forgotten People, London, 1946, contains a description of a purported visit to the mountain Jews, rich in melodrama but sadly devoid of factual information. And once again, it's like hard to nail these suckers down. Other Khazar enclaves have survived in the Crimea and no doubt elsewhere too in localities which once belonged to their empire, but these are now no more than historic curios compared to the mainstream of the Khazar migration into the Polish-Lithuanian regions and the formidable problems it poses to historians and anthropologists. Section 4. The regions in eastern Central Europe in which the Jewish immigrants from Khazaria found a new home and apparent safety had only begun to assume political importance toward the end of the first millennium. Around 962, several Slavonic tribes formed an alliance under the leadership of the strongest among them, the Polans, which became the nucleus of the Polish state. Thus, the Polish rise to eminence started about the same time as the Khazar decline. Sarkel was destroyed in 965. It is significant that Jays play an important role in one of the earliest Polish legends relating to the foundation of the Polish kingdom. We are told that when the allied tribes decided to elect a king to rule them all, they chose a Jay named Abraham Prokonik. Or maybe it's Prokovnik, whatever. He may have been a rich and educated Khazar merchant from whose experience the Slav backwoodsmen hoped to benefit, or just a legendary figure. But if so, the legend indicates that the Jays of his type were held in high esteem. At any rate, so the story goes on, Abraham, with unwanted modesty, resigned the crown in favor of a native peasant named Piast, who thus named the founder of the historic Piast dynasty, which ruled Poland from circa 962 to 1370. Whether Abraham Proshovnik existed or not, there are plenty of indications that the Jewish immigrants from Khazaria were welcomed as a valuable asset to the country's economy and government administration. The Poles under the Piast dynasty and their Baltic neighbors, the Lithuanians, had rapidly expanded their frontiers. And it says here in this footnote that the two nations became united in a series of treaties starting in 1386 into the Kingdom of Poland. For the sake of brevity, I shall use the term, quote, Polish Jews to refer to both countries, regardless of the fact that at the end of the 18th century, Poland was partitioned between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, and its inhabitants became officially citizens of these three countries. Actually, the so-called Pale of Settlement with Imperial Russia, to which Jays were confined from 1792 onward, coincided with the areas annexed from Poland plus parts of the Ukraine. Only certain privileged categories of Jays were permitted to live outside the Pale. These, at the time of the 1897 census, numbered only 200,000 as compared to nearly 5 million inside the Pale, i.e., within former Polish territory. Okay, let's see. Okay, the Lithuanians had rapidly expanded their frontiers and were in dire need of immigrants to colonize their territories and to create an urban civilization. They encouraged first the immigration of German peasants, burghers, and craftsmen, and later of migrants from the territories occupied by the Golden Horde. Poland and Hungary were also briefly invaded by the Mongols in 1241 through 42, but they were not occupied, which made all the difference to their future history, including Armenians, Southern Slavs, and Khazars. Not all of these migrations were voluntary. They included large numbers of prisoners of war, such as Crimean Tatars, who were put to cultivate the estates of Lithuanian and Polish landlords in the conquered southern provinces. At the close of the 14th century, the Lithuanian principality stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. But in the 15th century, the Ottoman Turks, conquerors of Byzantium, advanced northward, and the landlords transferred the people from their estates and the border areas further inland. Among the populations thus forcibly transferred was a strong contingent of Karaites, the fundamentalist Jewish sect which rejected rabbinical learning. So, the ones that actually followed Torah, or tried to. According to a tradition which has survived among Karaites into modern times, their ancestors were brought to Poland by the great Lithuanian warrior prince Vytautas, or Witold, at the end of the 14th century as prisoners of war from Sulkat in the Crimea. In favor of this tradition speaks the fact that Witold, in 1388, granted a charter of the rights to the Jews of Troki, and the French traveler Delannoy found there, quote, a great number of Jews, end quote, speaking a different language from the Germans and natives. That language was, and still is, a Turkish dialect. In fact, the nearest among living languages to the lingua cumanica, which was spoken in the former Khazar territories at the time of the Golden Horde. According to Zajakowski, this language is still used in speech and prayer in the surviving Karaite communities in Troki, Vilna, Ponyevyej, Lutsk, and Halych. The Karaites also claim that before the Great Plague of 1710, they had some 32 or 37 communities in Poland and Lithuania. They call their ancient dialect the language of Kedar, end quote, just as Rabbi Patachia in the 12th century called their habitat north of the Black Sea, quote, the land of Kedar. And what he has to say about them, sitting in the dark through the Sabbath, ignorance of rabbinical learning, fits their sectarian attitude. Accordingly, Zajakowski, the eminent contemporary Turkologist, considers the Karaites from the linguistic point of view as the purest present-day representatives of the ancient Khazars. About the reasons why the sect preserved its language for about half a millennium, while the main body of Khazar Jews shed it in favor of the Yiddish lingua franca, more will have to be said later. And oh, I'd love to hear it, since they want to tell us that they speak Hebrew. Okay? They spoke Yiddish with Aramaic alphabet is what they speak. But whatever. It's neither here nor there, is it? Actually, it is here and there, because people are literally going to biblical Hebrew to see what it actually says, and that's not what it actually says. It says what it says in the Greek. Anyways, Section 5. The Polish kingdom adopted from its very beginnings under the Piast dynasty a resolutely Western orientation together with Roman Catholicism. But compared with its Western neighbors, it was culturally and economically an underdeveloped country. Hence the policy of attracting immigrants, Germans from the West, Armenians and Khazar Jews from the East, and giving them every possible encouragement for their enterprise, including royal charters detailing their duties and special privileges. And the charter issued by Boleslav the Pious in 1264 and confirmed by Casimir the Great in 1334, Jews were granted the right to maintain their own synagogues, schools, and courts, to hold landed property, and engage in any trade or occupation they chose. Under the rule of King Stephen Bathory, 1575 through 86, Jews were granted a parliament of their own, which met twice a year and had the power to levy taxes on their co-religionists. After the destruction of their country, Khazar Jewry had entered a new chapter in its history. A striking illustration for their privileged condition is given in a papal breve issued in the second half of the 13th century, probably by Pope Clement IV, and addressed to an unnamed Polish prince. In this document, the Pope lets it be known that the Roman authorities are well aware of the existence of a considerable number of synagogues in several Polish cities. Indeed, no less than 5 synagogues in one city alone, probably Wrocław or Krakow. He deplores the fact that these synagogues are reported to be taller than the churches, more stately and ornamental, and roofed with colorfully painted leaden plates, making the adjacent Catholic churches look poor in comparison. One is reminded of Masudi's gleeful remark that the minaret of the main mosque was the tallest building in Italy. The complaints in the breve are further authenticated by a decision of the papal legate, Cardinal Guido, dated 1267, stipulating that Jews should not be allowed more than one synagogue to a town. We gather from these documents, which are roughly contemporaneous with the Mongol conquest of Khazaria, that already at the time there must have been considerable numbers of Khazars present in Poland, if they had in several towns more than one synagogue, and that they must have been fairly prosperous to build them so, quote, stately and ornamental, end quote. This leads us to question the approximate size and composition of the Khazar immigration into Poland. Regarding the numbers involved, we have no reliable information to guide us. We remember that the Arab sources speak of Khazar armies numbering 300,000 men involved in the Muslim-Khazar wars. And even if allowance is made for quite wild exaggerations, this would indicate a total Khazar population of at least 500,000 souls. Ibn Fadlan gave the number of tents in the Volga Bulgars as 50,000, which would mean a population of 300,000 to 400,000, i.e., roughly the same order of magnitude as the Khazars. On the other hand, the number of Jews in the Polish-Lithuanian kingdom in the 17th century is also estimated by modern historians at 500,000, 5% of the total population. These figures do not fit in too badly with the known facts about protracted Khazar migration via the Ukraine to Poland, Lithuania, starting with the destruction of Sarkal and the rise of the PS dynasty toward the end of the first millennium, accelerating during the Mongol conquest, and being more or less completed in the 15th, 16th centuries, by which time the steppe had been emptied and the Khazars had apparently been wiped off the face of the earth. The last of the ancient Khazar villages on the Dnieper were destroyed on the Cossack revolt under Khmelnytsky in the 17th century, and the survivors gave a further powerful boost to the number of Jews in the already existing settlement area of Poland-Lithuania. Altogether, this population transfer was spread out over 5 or 6 centuries of trickle and flow. If we take into account the considerable influx of Jewish refugees from Byzantium and the Muslim world into Khazaria, and a small population increase among the Khazars themselves, it appears plausible that the tentative figures for the Khazar population at its peak in the 8th century should be comparable to that of the Jews in Poland in the 17th century, at least by order of magnitude, give or take a few 100,000 as a token of our ignorance. There is irony hidden in these numbers. According to the article, quote, Statistics in the Jewish Encyclopedia, in the 16th century, the total Jewish population of the world amounted to about 1 million. This seems to indicate, as Polyak, Kutschera, and others have pointed out, that during the Middle Ages, the majority of those who professed the Judaic faith were Khazars. A substantial part of this majority went to Poland, Lithuania, Hungary, and the Balkans, where they founded that Eastern Jewish community, which in its turn became the dominant majority of world Jewry. Even if the original core of that community was diluted and augmented by immigrants from other religions, its predominantly Khazar-Turkish derivation appears to be supported by strong evidence, and should at least be regarded as a theory worth serious discussion. Additional reasons for attributing the leading role in the growth and development of the Jewish community in Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe, mainly to the Khazar element and not to immigrants from the West, will be discussed in the chapters that follow, but it may be appropriate at this point to quote the Polish historian Adam Vetulani. Polish scholars agree that these oldest settlements were founded by Jewish emigres from the Khazar state and Russia, while the Jews from southern and western Europe began to arrive and settle only later. And at a certain proportion, at least of the Jewish population in earlier times, the main bulk originated from the east, from the Khazar country, and later from Kievan Russia. Section 6, Chapter 5, Exodus. So much for size, but what do we know of the social structure and composition of the Khazar immigrant community? The first impression one gains is a striking similarity between certain privileged positions held by Khazar Jews in Hungary and in Poland in those early days. Both the Hungarian and Polish sources refer to Jews employed as mint masters, administrators of the royal revenue, controllers of the salt monopoly, tax collectors, and, quote, money lenders, i.e., bankers. This parallel suggests a common origin of those two immigrant communities, and as we can trace the origins of the bulk of Hungarian Jewry to the Magyar-Khazar nexus, the conclusion seems self-evident. Early records reflect the part played by immigrant Jews in the two countries' budding economic life. That it was an important part is not surprising, since foreign trade and the levying of customs duties had been the Khazars' principal source of income in the past. Yeah, they just got like the taxes. That's how they made their living, off people's taxes. So nothing's changed today. Okay. The early records reflect the part played by immigrant Jews in the two voting up and down. Okay. They had the experience which their new hosts were lacking, and it was only logical that they were called in to advise and participate in the management of the finances of court and nobility. The coins minted in the 12th and 13th centuries with Polish inscriptions in Hebrew lettering are somewhat bizarre relics of these activities. The exact purpose they served are still something of a mystery. Some bear the name of a king, for example, Lezek and Mieszko. Others are inscribed, quote, from the house of Abraham ben Joseph the Prince, end quote, possibly the mentor banker himself, or just a word of benediction, quote, luck or blessing, end quote. Significantly, contemporary Hungarian sources also speak of the practice of minting coins from silver provided by Jewish